This is the Razor Sharp program. This is the midweek review. My name's Sharon Farbrace. I have with me right now Mick Armstrong on my left, and he's from the Red Flag newspaper. It's an independent paper. And I also have on my right here Kelvin Granger, and he's the Vice President of the Community Law Resource Association, a community-driven legal body of people in the community. But welcome to the show, listeners. Very important. We're certainly thrust into the
improvement on the small business, not so small business tax burden, is that it's going to improve employment. And yet the same government, their projected employment is that it will remain flat. So they can't possibly say that giving small business some tax relief will improve employment, and then have it the employment figures will remain fairly flat over the projected outlook the next 4 years.
So, I mean, really, it's a furphy, or some would say it's a lie. We're saying, well, the research doesn't stack up. We've seen declining jobs, declining figures, declining numbers. We've seen something like 23.3% of part-time portional jobs increase. So, I mean, people are living on, and the definition of what is a job, what is employment, change and get distorted, if not even indeed perverted, to the point that the goalposts have changed, and in which case, we've had more people 2.5 million people in poverty has been a record in-your-face statistic, Mick, that, I mean, obviously has concerned us. That, along with what Kelvin's just mentioned here, I mean, obviously the employment figures don't stack up, but the poverty figures do stack up. So on the social line, we've got the poverty issues stacking up with 105 homeless on any one given night. And we're seeing also two record debt levels. We're seeing 133% of debt accumulate, which is household debt. Now that really is a poverty issue. And then we're seeing again too that, the jobs that they're claiming that they've got aren't, they're hollow, in other words. There is not the substance here. We've seen the car industry crash. We've seen Holden, Ford, Toyota crash. Yeah. We haven't seen the fallout yet on that, have we? So this is where the rubber's hitting the ground. This is where we're seeing around us, Deer Park, Sunshine, western suburbs. We're seeing more people now on the ground in the middle of the day without jobs, unemployment. We're seeing crime rates also escalate. This is what we do see. We're seeing that throughout the week reports of homeless people in the streets, of course, and we're seeing more begging in the streets. Getting police to remove them is not the answer, but getting practical solutions is. So, I mean, that's what we're seeing that justifies the fact that, we're in an unprecedented time, we're in a crisis time, the facts don't add up, and the Liberal National Conservative government that's been in power, they've got a lot to answer for. So we look to a government to give us some answers and some solutions. So, Kelvin, on that, obviously you're concerned about the levels of poverty that's growing around us.
I'm very concerned about the social side of our society, full stop. From unemployment, public housing, ability to get a sustainable job, a job that's going to be meaningful. The whole side of it, I think, is farcical. And the reason for that is that we're in this fascist-driven society. We've been in that area, progressively getting worse for 80 years. And the last 30 years has been absolutely atrocious. And unless some sort of government starts to address that issue, it's never going to improve. And unless the people start to insist by means of their local member that they start to do something for the people, I can't see it improving. I can't see how it can improve. I'd like to think we could improve it, but I can't see how it will. As some of these parliamentarians or parliaments have got to start to stand up. I noticed that, sure, it's a state issue, but the states get their money from the federal government. There appears to be nothing for public housing, hasn't even been mentioned in this electorate. Sure, it's early days, but you would think that some people would be starting to concern themselves with, as you said, all these unemployment, people that don't have a house or somewhere to stop overnight. All those issues are extremely important. And the cost to society that causes by means of people going and having an out by smoking some kind of drug or taking some kind of drug, and that emphasises and builds on the problem. Now our hospitals are full. Now our jails are full. We must start to fill our education precincts, not our jails. Our jails should not be the pick-up point where society's gone wrong. We must start to build learning infrastructures that have some meaning and are like TAFEs and universities. They must start to become proactive in the education of the young people. And if they don't, our jails are going to need to be bigger. So the government, if I see it, have got a choice. They either build schools or build jails. At the moment, we seem to be building jails.
Yes, it seems like that might be the government's strategy, Mick. Building jails, the imprisonment of people, obviously, and the money that's being made on that. I mean, let's look at it. We've become a profit-driven economy. We're moving away. They are moving us away from a not-for-profit society into a just-for-profit. This is the transition. This is the revolution that's occurring under our nose. It's almost a velvet revolution, Mick. In the sense that the situation economically is definitely changing. We've just spoken to listeners about the landscape socially. We need to look at that. These are the indicators. Obviously, Mick, something's wrong socially. What are your concerns? And also, too, the trickle-down effect that the government says and the Turnbull government says are going to create jobs. The jobs just aren't there. Where do the people go from here?
Well, just on the jobs front first, the other thing is the Turnbull government saying to introduce these internships for $4 an hour, and that, well, they'll be counted as not being unemployed. And that, so there's a whole attempt to hide it, but also we introduced cheap labour, which puts downwards pressure on the wages of everybody else. And the other thing, one of the things didn't get much commentary in the budget, is the government's cutting every pension, and that for existing pensioners they won't be cut. But everybody knew that goes on the old age pension, disability support, or the unemployment benefits is going to be cut now, and that when they're taking away the supposed amount that the compensation they got for the carbon, for the carbon tax and that. So it's just across the board where you see this enormous polarisation in society. And I agree about the stuff about prisons and that, but you see it, the wealth of the people at the top is increasing enormously. They're benefiting and that, and and it's across the board. It's the people right at the bottom, but ordinary working class people or and that in the middle are also not benefiting. So there's a polarisation in society, and I think The prison stuff's related to another element. It's the law and order stuff as a distraction, and the same thing with the refugee bashing and that. That look at the amount of money that is being spent on the detention centres, concentration camps is the real word, in Nauru and Manus Island and so on.
Yes.
The billions of dollars being spent on these when they could be building housing for people and that, and it's horrendous, and it's the way, and it's all around the world. It's not, I mean, just see in the context, it's not just Australia. All these things happening all around the world, but you see in Europe with the the rise of the far right and so on, whipping up racism, law and order panics and so on, to cover for the attacks on the rest of it. And like in the context of this election, unfortunately, whereas in formal terms the Labor Party and the Greens have got better policy, the trouble is with the Labor Party, they won't stand up on the refugee question and that, and they're and clearly the government wants to. To the extent that Turnbull has a hope of getting back is by whipping up racism and so on, like Abbott did, and to get back that way. And so, yes, I agree. If we're going to have a change, ordinary people have got to stand up and that, and we need to have a fight back across the board, and it's the same with the unions. We've got to rebuild the unions so they become organisations which seriously stand up and fight for working class interests. And at the moment, one of the problems of this election, the union approach just seems to be to get out door knocking and phone backing for the Labor Party, which really is not good enough, and that we need a broader fight back. Because to be honest, even if Shorten gets in, unless there's a broader fight up and people make a stand, well, who knows what Labor will do.
Yes, precisely. So, I mean, this is what the concern is, Labor or Liberal. What we need is parties seem to be going in one direction, whereas the public are obviously moving in another direction. The public are definitely desperate to get policies which are going to address the needs of the public here at large. Jobs is central, but as we're seeing, the Liberal National Conservative government has shrunk in the numbers of jobs that they've actually presented and been able to employ people in particular the youth, which is something like 25% youth unemployment. These are raging statistics. This is going to interpret and flow on into the future, which could exacerbate. And of course, will they have the solutions? Will they start to conscript the youth? Will they start to conscript people? And they are actually through, that is the issue of work for the dole. So work for the dole, I mean, as much as you said internship is really only going to create a minimal amount of income per week, they're saying that work for the dole, the people will be conscripted into 24 hours a week, 5 days a week, for 6 months of the year, working for a corporation. So you work for the corporation and give them your labour. Now, they're going to make enormous benefit out of that. That's going to boost their bottom line. That's going to boost their profits. Then on top of it, they're going to get from the taxpayer a payment as well, which is going to be from our hard-earned grunt, a benefit to the corporation. So we can see that this is a policy which is stuck right in favour of the rich, in favour of the multinational corporations. These are the very policies that we were concerned about back in 2014. These are the policies that were tried to be shunted upon us and shoved into us by of course, at the time, Mr. Abbott. But we're seeing now that he lost in popularity. He had 30 negative consecutive polls through the great fight back and through the trench warfare that was created. If people have a right to self-defence, do we not? That's both economically and the minimum wage, common wage, was to protect us. And that's where I think working for the dole, I mean, obviously, it should be wiped out because we should be restructured back to the minimum wage, wouldn't you say? The 8-hour day was one of the most, one of the greatest wars ever fought, was it not? Longer than perhaps some of even the great military wars, was the fight and war on workers' rights in the factories and rights to have a common decent wage, and a wage which Australia actually forged out at the beginning of the century, and now has come under attack. As we see that, the headlines today with Mr. Shorten, the penalty rates to be are under assault by both major parties, and that's of great concern because at the root of the penalty rates on Saturday, Sunday is the whole attack on the sacred 8-hour day, is it not, Mick? This is if we're going to have fair distribution of wealth, it comes from the wage that the common working man and woman earns, and the fair distribution of that wealth. It doesn't come from the trickle-down ideological direction that the Turnbull government is believing.
Well, they just want an open slather. They want people to work unsocial hours, and that more and more, and cut back. And the penalty rates are so important for a whole lot of workers. That, well, you look at the one level, you've got people like nurses, firefighters and so on that have to be out available at all sorts of hours, and eventually they want to roll them back. But first they're tackling people in hospitality, in the supermarkets and so on, and that who are on low wages anyhow, and often are just part-time work, and that they want to get them to work as cheap as possible, so it's just across the board that things are under attack. If you give up on one thing, they don't satisfy it. It's not as though big business or the bosses are satisfied. Oh, we've made some concession, we've reached some deal. No, they're constantly coming back for some things, and you can see it more broadly. I mean, clearly, the government didn't introduce some horrendous budget, and that they've tried to fudge things to seem like, oh, it's not so bad. But you can see the big business press, if you read the financial pages, their pretty much approach is, oh, okay, this is all right to get through this election. The government had to be seen to be giving something, not much, to ordinary people. But after the election, well, then all the big business think tanks, lobby groups, and so on will be demanding more and more. And penalty rates are just one element of that. A tax on social services, winding back basis protection. They've got a whole program of other things they want to privatise as well, and where they can make big money out of this. So, they're not satisfied, and so that makes it even more important that people stand up. That the idea that you can have this polite negotiation with these vultures that just want to rip as much as possible out of people. No. They're determined, and so it's very much important then that our side gets organised to stand up and resist this, because otherwise we just come to be picked over and done down, as it's gone on. It was mentioned earlier, for the last 30 years this has been going on.
Yes, indeed, but it's up to the people and the public to bring it to a halt and to bring it to an end. We have seen some very strong fight back from 2014 on in the budget. We saw one Prime Minister deposed of. 30 negative consecutive polls was the people, and that was there was a turn in the nation. There's a turn now at the moment, although they're saying that they're deadlocked at the moment, with a deadlocked position, 50-50 at the polls, both major parties. We've got the Greens also factoring into it, particularly on this penalty rate issue. Would you not think, Kelvin, that double dissolution may work itself into a general election? We've had a double dissolution election now called by the Prime Minister. Could it become a general election, in which case it would change? The Senate itself wouldn't be, not all positions would be vacated, and it's been a great grunt, a major concern of this Liberal National Conservative government to control the Senate and to control both the upper house and lower house, as John Howard did during his time. Is that of concern to you?
Yes, it is. And my concern with the coalition government, full stop, and it's been a premise for many years, that they seem to think they've got this God-given right to rule. And they seem to think that everything they say is absolutely factual, and everything that everybody else says is of no consequence or wrong. The other thing they seem to think is that everything they do and everybody is absolute and everybody else is wrong. I like, for instance, going back to this, bringing the refugees back to Australia. Not all, but most of these refugees are fleeing countries that Australia was in conflict with not so long ago, whether at Afghanistan, Iraq, now Syria, where our jets are fighting over there, and northern Afghanistan again. So we have a social responsibility to be bringing some of these refugees back here. Our country's caused a lot of these problems that these people are fleeing, and now we just want to wipe our hands of it. I don't think morally this country can stand up and look people in the face, and particularly the Duttons of the world, look people in the face and act in good faith and say, we're not gonna have people coming in here unless we agree to it, and we're going to bring in a handful compared to what some of these European countries, as Mick said, are taking in hundreds of thousands of people. I think it's forecast that we might be going to take in 12,000. It's just wrong. It doesn't matter which way it stacks up. We must start to live up to our responsibility in the world. We've caused a lot of this problem. We must start to live up to it, and we must be prepared to bring them back. And the people of this country must start to see through this this mainstream media and look at the truth, not the rubbish that's put there. So they're scaremongering, like, for instance, Howard did with the babies overboard or the Tampa affair, and now we've got it with close our borders and stop the boats. Sure, we can't have these people coming over on leaky boats and drowning. I understand that. But let's fly them here. If there's a genuine need and they're genuine refugees, let's bring them here. Why do we put them on a leaky boat? Or why do we allow them to go onto a leaky boat? Why can't we bring them here ourselves? Largely we've caused it. Not totally sure, but we've caused it to a substantial extent. So I think those people ought to come here and be treated in a proper and humane and civil manner that we would expect to treat our own people. Now, the other matter you was talking about was the government on their 50-50. I think at the moment it's actually 51 Labor, 49 Liberal, but it's very close, and that will fluctuate through the election. I think Labor had a bit of a hiccup where someone didn't disclose the fact that they bought a $2 million house just recently. All those little things have an effect on the polls, so they're going to fluctuate up and down. And it's going to be a big call for Labor to get back in. They've got a long road back, and if they can get back in and make the coalition a one-term government, then Shorten's really done a wonderful job. And I think Shorten is very good. I think he's mobilised the Labor Party fairly well. I disagree with the penalty rates that's going on. He, as Mick says, he should come out and say, look, penalty rates must be seen as sacrosanct. There must be some incentive for a person to work unsocial hours, as Mick says. I think there's got to be some kind of an incentive for someone to work through the night or a Saturday and a Sunday when everybody else is off playing football or going to the football or watching a Grand Prix race or something along those natures. So I agree. I think Turnbull should come out. If Turnbull doesn't start, or the Labor Party doesn't start to flow slightly more to the left, then they're going to find the Greens are going to take up over more and more of their seats, particularly the inner metropolitan seats. I think they're all in danger, and I think the strategy of the Labor Party must swing more towards the left or the middle of the political fence, if you like, rather than this being on the right side of it. And so I that's how I see the penalty rates. I think as Mick said, I think Labor's got to come out and show their colours. It's no good saying, we'll put a submission into the group that are making that decision, and that's as far as we'll go. I think they've got to be politically far more active than they are.
Yes, well, perhaps Mr. Shorten's interpreted it the wrong way, and that is that this is an election campaign. In election campaigns, you can speak against what the Fair Work Commission says. You're supposed to represent the policies that you believe that for the good of the nation, and certainly at the core of the ALP, the Labor Party, as we know, is the issue to do with protecting labour, protecting worker. That's where the generation of the wealth of the nation is generated, and that's from the worker's wage and the distribution of that, not through the flow down, top down, filling up the pockets of the rich to get richer, giving them, and not chasing also to the tax that's been offshored through the Panama Files that would drop the 11.5 million Panama Files, and the rest that we don't know about. But where we're seeing that there's elitism developing, classism and even racism at the root of all this, because we're seeing that that those that have money and have wealth are treated with exception to the rule, that they are above the law, and where they are not, they pay tax like we all pay tax. And it's interesting to see that they should pay more tax, and they should pay for the privilege of getting entry into our economy, and that should be the banks, and also there should be no privatisation. They should reverse privatisation as a policy doctrine. This should be coming right out of the ALP, because out of it we're losing jobs. Jobs are being offshored, are they not, Mick, etc. We've seen no good come out of it. And so we need to stop it and end to it. And I think that Daniel Andrews has been able to, in the ALP Premier of the state of Victoria, has led the way in the just being recently elected, or when they were elected, in cancelling the East-West Link. So he cancelled that because of the popular swell of the public, and he listened to the public, and he saved the Victorian state $17 billion. Not just it cost $1 billion, but he saved $17 billion. That obviously is the right way to go. Put the wealth back into the treasury, put it back under common state, put it back under the public and the people. Terminate those contracts. And start that the wealth will begin to accumulate. Start to tax the multinational corporations that should have privilege to be here in our economy, and certainly not to sit in the seats of power, and to sit in our cabinet and sit in our government, and certainly not to knock up the budgets. Certainly not to knock up like as the National Commission of Audit did when they knocked up the 2014 budget. That is taboo. That's outlawed, and we can see that even this budget in 2016 has got far too much top end of town multinational corporation element in it, because the benefits are flowing to the rich and to the corporations. So here, just as we sort of round off toward the end here, Mick, privatisation. This has become a big issue as we look at Transurban, a big multinational development. But let's reel the film back to 1992. Jeff Kennett, he was the Premier of the State of Victoria. We saw untold numbers of projects that were privatised then, but including CityLink. Now that CityLink bought, it cost $1.8 billion to establish the link and to establish everything, but they've reaped from it about $20 billion. They're now going to expand that right across the entire network. I mean, and we see now that the federal government's going to throw in on this, on condition that the state of Victoria, if they put $10 billion in to developments here with rail and roads and what have you, that the Victorian state government is to surrender and give and yield all of its money-making concerns, state operations. Is that of concern to you? Should we be concerned about that, and especially in an election time?
Well, of course we should, because it's just getting worse, and it means everything's being marketised. Huge profit being made by Transurban for providing nothing in real terms, and that, and not just them, it's all the financial institutions associated with them. Because each of these privatisations, when they float from them, this massive amount of money go to all these private investors, and that. But it also pushes it towards providing roads rather than public transport and that, which is so vital. I mean, the roads are more and more clogged up. It's not going to be resolved just by putting more, freeways or tollways in. When there could be, you talk about jobs and that. Well, a massive number of jobs could be created. Like the Andrews government's doing this one rail project, and that, and there's a couple of other minor things they're doing as well. But Melbourne needs a really first-rate public transport system to pop the growth of the city, and then it ties into the refugee stuff they're going on about jobs. Hold on, there's millions of things that people could be doing, whether it's building public housing, building more. All sorts of infrastructure things, hospitals, schools, public transport, and that. There's so many things we need to service the interests of people, and yet there's people unemployed. I mean, this is the epitome of sort of neoliberal capitalism, and that. At the same time, there's all these people unemployed, and yet the rich and powerful, the people who live in Toorak and so on, are the best off they've ever been. The gap between the people at the bottom or the people in the middle, ordinary workers on a decent job even, and the rich, just grows year after year, and there's relentlessness in the society, and somehow privatise more is going to take things forward. It's we've got to totally reverse this tide, and we need much more genuine democratic control by the mass of people. We just can't leave it up to Parliament and so-called representatives there. There's got to be a groundswell from below of protests, mass mobilisations, and so on. And rebuilding at the base the trade unions as rank and file organisations which stand up and defend workers' interests in that, because if we don't do that, well, the whole progression is going to get worse, and we see the future in Europe. Australian economy's held up better than most over the last decade, and yet we're under attack here. In Europe, and the US for that matter, it's even worse. It's attack after attack, a massive reduction in living standards. Well, unless we fight back, that's what's going to happen here too.
Yes, indeed. If you don't fight, we lose. That's been a great slogan coming right out of all the civil and political movements since the 17th century. Kelvin, on that point though, privatisation, deregulation, a monster, is it not? Is it actually attacking our democracy? Are we not selling our democracy off?
Absolutely, we're selling our democracy off, and not only with the government we've got here in Victoria, over successive governments for many, many years, as Mick just indicated. But I'd like to go back to the reason we privatise. We privatise because the state doesn't want to be in too much debt. So what we do is we sell it off, and instead of paying the debt back, we're now paying a dividend. So you've got this dividend as opposed to debt concept that tugs at one another, and guess who the losers are? The people of Victoria. As Sharon said, Daniel Andrews saved the people of Victoria about $17 billion for wiping that East-West Connect Road, or whatever it was called. So, but the concept of the state being in debt and the people of Victoria paying a dividend is never able to be reconciled by me. I don't understand the concept of how the people of Victoria are better off. I understand the government, bugger the government, the people of Victoria, who we're here to, and it's them that need to be brought out of the mire that we're currently going down, as Mick just indicated. It's the people that these parliaments have got to work for. They can't keep going down this fascist line of working for corporations. Corporations equal dictatorship. Democracy is what we need in this country. We have to have democracy. We cannot have this fascist dictatorship that we've had and for 80 years, as I said earlier, and been really bad for the last 30 years. And I don't care what level, what political persuasion you pick. It's the way it's been going, and it's been going that way for many years, and it's getting worse. This concept where we think that we've got to go and borrow money to build infrastructure also doesn't gel with me. We built the Snowy River concept by printing money, paying the people, and now we have that infrastructure. We built the East-West Rail Link by printing money, and now we have that infrastructure. If it's infrastructure, we can print the money and it will not hurt the economy, as these economics blaster us free-thinking people for thinking a little bit outside the square. We don't need to tax the people. We don't need to borrow money to build infrastructure. And we certainly don't need to toll the people of Victoria for using that infrastructure. That'd be the main things I think I'd say on that, Sharon.
Well, there we are. It's a user pay economy. User pay, being not-for-profit economy being converted into a just-for-profit. User pay, use will pay. Is what this 2016 election is about. But it's up to the public, and we see the fight back as we just conclude here, viewers, and that is that the public are no longer, by all information, by all data that's coming before us, they are not convinced that the policies sitting before us are in the public's interest. It's been in the trenches since 2014, and I'm certain that it's going to continue to be in the trenches, because the fat lady hasn't sung yet, and the time's not up yet. The election has not been held, and I'm certain that this country is going to see a very interesting future. Thank you very much indeed for joining me today.
Thanks, Sharon.
It's an absolute.
The black youth hurry up to and join the huddle. We're proving truth to societies and trying to rubble. Minds free to start a double. Lies beat to seek defeat. The best man humble. Keep your spirit to land, although your sneaks on the street. I still realize your people still ain't squashing. Better beat the skin deep, but I'm betting that they just feel threatened. From this one city, keep all them made, get 'em made. Black weapon, Western Aranda, double Tory bar, put it all together straight up. Black fella, I rock collars in black and white. Recite ancient stories from day time. When I fly on the mic, let me take you back to the mission. So listen, we fighting for existence, resistant for instant. My thoughts